So yeah, I'm Alexandra. I've been using Elixir for the last like year and a half or so. I went to Turing School for the boot camp after being a chemical engineer for about 10 years and ran away from that because I felt bad about working in oil and gas, and that was kind of where I got pigeonholed. So yeah, I'm pretty new to the tech community. And yeah, as kind of a background for this talk, I went to ElixirConf last summer and watched the talk about the results from the annual Elixir ecosystem survey that they had done. And I'm going to get the statistics wrong. I'll have it on another slide, but I think it was basically 2% of the respondents identified as women and like 0.7 non-binary and 93 or something % men. So I was like, we need a community for these few of us women that are around. So I started a Slack, what is it called, channel in the main Elixir Slack for women and diverse genders. And that kind of spun off to getting invited to Elixir Wizards podcast interview, which was awesome. But I had done so much research and talked to so many smart people beforehand and barely got to talk about any of it that I was like, okay, I'll do a meetup just so I can get all of this out. So this is the product of talking to lots of cool people over the last couple months. And let's see if this works. My arrow keys don't work. Seriously. There we go. Okay. So yeah, starting out, you'll hear the term a lot, DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And just kind of to define what those words mean, I feel like it's kind of replaced the older just like diversity concept, which kind of, I feel like it's kind of like a building stepping stone. So like diversity is kind of more like the representation of people of a lot of different identities, be it race or gender or religion or sexual orientation or any of those kind of protected classes you might think of. So yeah, it's kind of just like, are there diverse people in the room, basically, is kind of how I think of like diversity. Equity gets more into, is everyone being treated fairly, being paid equally for equal work, that kind of thing. Yeah, equal access to like advancement in your career and all of that. And then inclusion is kind of a focus on making people feel welcome, making sure, I guess, again, that people are in the room able to like kind of self-govern. I think of inclusion as part of that, like, yeah, not just being in the room, but being in the room where it happens, I guess, like, yeah. So yeah, so this is kind of where I got into this whole thing. Like I said, looking at the Elixir survey, I already kind of gave those stats around how skewed towards men the Elixir survey was. They didn't measure any other like demographic data. I'm trying to talking to the organizers of that for the next years to try and get at least like a race question added to that, race and ethnicity. But yeah, I thought when I filtered through the data of all the individual responses on there, and one thing I thought was interesting and looked at a lot was like how people got into Elixir, and specifically how women and non-binary folks got into it. And 83% of female respondents said that they use Elixir at work, which is only 68% for men. So that means that like hiring is a huge driver of getting women into Elixir jobs. Because yeah, we might just not have as much time with family duties or whatever to be doing side projects and, you know, checking out the latest blogs of what the newest cool thing is. Like for me, I got into Elixir because I got a job that they used it for all their microservices. So that's why I started. So yeah. One kind of depressing statistic, which puts a focus on why all this stuff is so important, is that supposedly half of, this is like a big Accenture study, half of young women leave the tech industry by the time they're 35 years old, with most of them citing a lack of an inclusive culture as the main reason for leaving. So this stuff is very important. And yeah, kind of as a comparison, I looked at the Stack Overflow survey that they do every year. And I mean, it definitely depends on like who is completing the survey versus actually using the technology and all of that. But basically the Elixir statistics were worse than any of the 25 languages that they surveyed for in Stack Overflow as far as diversity goes. Like the worst on there for both women and people of African descent was Rust, which I think is funny because I feel like there's a lot of overlap between Elixir and Rust folks. But yeah, even Rust had 2.7% women. And kind of on the other side of it, some of the languages that are doing really well that we have some overlap with is Ruby was actually one of the languages with the most women, which I thought was interesting. And probably has something to do with like catering to beginners, maybe. We'll get into that a little bit on the next slide, but that was interesting that they're doing something right with their community. And yeah. So yeah, I thought one more statistic before we move on that was interesting was that almost 20% of women put diversity in the top 3 of reasons why they choose to work at a company. And kind of related to that, company culture and a flexible schedule were the number 1 and number 2 reasons for women to pick a company. Out of here. Can you guys see this little controller thing?
You can, but it's not ruining the experience.
Oh, there it goes. Okay. So yeah, kind of getting back to that question of, is Elixir a good language for beginners? Like kind of, I guess, a good first language, like maybe you went to a boot camp or something else, but you want to try and get your first job in Elixir. I think that one of the advantages that Elixir has is that we have a welcoming community. Like if we get new people showing up at the meetup, we're always excited. We're a small community. Happy to have new people. We've got pretty good docs. I think there isn't really like one really clear resource that beginners go to for learning Elixir. I feel like I did find some on kind of like the Elixir Lang website, but didn't really try them out. But yeah, another good thing about Elixir is that like whether or not you're gonna use Elixir in the end, if for any level of developer, I think that learning some of the functional paradigms are going to be helpful for you, no matter what language, even if it's OOP, are going to be really helpful. And yeah, we have got some beautiful, readable, debuggable code. But the problems with hiring or being an Elixir, junior Elixir dev are that you don't see a lot of entry-level positions. There's potentially it looks like we've got pretty low diversity in the community. You know, you might have a hard time finding other people to talk with or feel at home with, I guess. And yeah, it's not, from what I've heard, I don't think that it's really taught at any like universities or boot camps. So there's not really like a more organized on-ramp, I guess, for getting started. There we go. So yeah, I heard that these, I think that a lot of people use these words, but I heard this at a really good talk from the CEO of Reboot Representation, who has a focus on getting and keeping women, and particularly women of color, in tech. And so she said that we can all give our time, talent, and treasures, which means time you can think of as like volunteering, and talent could be maybe mentoring or giving a talk. And treasures are more like monetary stuff, so like donations to nonprofits, scholarships. And if you are a manager, maybe like adding funding to employee resource groups, which I'll talk about in 1 or 2 slides from now. So yeah, how can we help? I feel like this really depends on like who we are. Like I'm gonna kind of go through, break down different levels of like almost roles and what each kind of those roles or groups can do to improve DEI. So kind of the most obvious one is like, as a company or a manager, what can you do? Because like I said, hiring diverse folks is kind of like the #1 way that we're going to change these demographics. You know, if we just keep hiring people that already know Elixir, then we're never going to change anything. So yeah, first thing would be to actively seek out diverse hires from like historically Black colleges and universities, or maybe boot camps or student groups. Offering apprenticeships has been something that I've heard a lot of good feedback from, but I feel like a lot of companies haven't really stuck with it. So I don't know exactly what the experience people have had with doing that. Turing just started a apprenticeship program that you can sign up for at your company. That sounds pretty cool. So yeah, moving on from like getting your hiring pool down to like actually posting the job. Colorado recently added a law that you have to share your salary, I think it's salary bands maybe, on all of your job postings. You need to be more transparent about that, and that is meant to help with equity, because it kind of removes the focus on negotiating and make sure that no matter whether you kind of have the confidence and everything to negotiate your salary, you're going to get a fair wage. So I think that's really cool. One other thing that I've heard suggested is making it very clear in the job description that like high quality applicants will have some or all of the following qualifications, like because based on all of the studies that have been done, men are much more likely to hire or to apply to a position if they just only check off some of the boxes in the like requirements or like desired qualifications, I guess, versus women often won't apply unless they hit all of them. So making like super explicit that these are like nice to haves, or you know, if they are nice to haves, then basically say that they are, make that very clear. And then another big thing is having family-friendly benefits. So like making it clear whether your healthcare covers your spouse and children, having a flexible work schedule, possibly covering like fertility treatments or gender confirmation surgery and stuff like that. As well as making it really clear that you're not expected to be doing learning stuff for work outside of your normal hours, like encouraging people to take courses or that kind of thing as part of their job. Helps a lot too. So once you've got somebody hired, having a good onboarding process can make a really big difference. When you bring somebody new on, especially if they're a marginalized demographic and maybe don't have other people that they can kind of like feel at home with, have like role models within the company, making sure that you include people on like every meeting and like platform and everything so they don't feel like they're being left out, can make a really big difference to somebody's first impression of the company and the team. A couple other things that you can do kind of at the company level are to hold regular internal retros that help you like celebrate wins when somebody does something that you want to give them kudos for, or also like really important to invite feedback in a non-judgmental way, kind of going into that, like making it possible for marginalized people to actually change the structures that we all work within. And yeah, I guess the last thing is having a diversity and inclusion strategy at all is like a good first step. Like I feel like in tech, I don't know, maybe they don't do this as much as I did in my chemical engineering jobs, but they always had like diversity training when you like first get hired, and it's like one hokey thing that you do, like a 2-hour class once and then never talk about again. um, so yeah, going beyond that kind of like surface level stuff to um, support and kind of empower your employees is way more important than kind of checking the box of doing some kind of training. So yeah, employee resource groups are typically, I mean, it can start as something as small as like at Blinker, we just started a Women of Blinker lunch and Slack channel that we get together once every week or two and talk about things, and just kind of like having that community really helps you feel more at home. So yeah, the kind of the next realm of who is responsible for things would be, I kind of clubbed a lot of things in here, like Slack groups, meetups, conferences, podcasts, all of that kind of stuff. I'll just quickly say that like, I think that highlighting diverse folks' work and talks is really important so that newer people coming up can see like people like me can do this is very powerful. And I think the Elixir Conf last year actually did a pretty good job of that. Having a code of conduct, like kind of even at work, like codifying your almost rules of engagement so that if there is a complaint about somebody's behavior, someone made someone feel uncomfortable, that kind of thing, then the problem is like between the offender and the code of conduct, like, you know, the boss or the organizers, whatever, not the offender and the person who felt discriminated against or harassed or whatever. Because yeah, if you feel like you would be retaliated against or like have to defend yourself, the allegations, that is a reason why people don't come forward with their complaints. So kind of tied directly into that is a way to anonymously report feedback or complaints. And we just added over the weekend / today these a code of conduct and a way to anonymously report feedback for this group. So we just linked to that in the like main meetup description, and we might talk a little bit after the talk about what's in there. Yeah, a couple more things that we can do at meetups and all of that is to focus on beginners. I did a survey of some of the women in tech and a few that specifically do Elixir stuff, and one person said that they really appreciated our meetup doing the beginner track in the kind of main talk, so that even if you're a beginner, you always have something that you can like participate with. And that was something that made people feel really welcome. So if you're looking for something to volunteer for and feel good about, come do a beginner's talk for us. So yeah, I guess another kind of like weird little niche of who can make these things better is the Elixir language or like open source community. Like I touched on before, like maybe improving getting started resources, measuring more demographics on the next survey. And then I think a couple more things are that I feel like Elixir really has a focus on performance and that kind of thing when all of our like marketing kind of materials, versus it like being beginner friendly and easy to debug or those kind of things that like, you know, if you're a brand new programmer, you don't really care about like concurrency or whatever. It's not going to be something that's like the reason why you choose to do a language. And yeah, I looked at the Elixir or Erlang Ecosystem Foundation. They have a couple of different groups around like marketing and outreach or education, something like that. But none of their documents mentioned any kind of focus on diversity that I saw at all. Maybe it's there, but they just don't write about it. And then, yeah, the kind of getting down to things that we can all do as individuals and make a difference are to make an extra effort to make people feel included on the team, like inviting people out to lunch, which isn't something we can really do anymore. But I guess that these days is kind of just like the same thing, like making sure that people are included in all of the activities when you onboard them or that kind of thing. So being an advocate and calling things out, like, okay, maybe you're not in charge of what benefits your company has and a lot of those things that I talked about a few slides ago, but you can bring these things up at work and change them. We're working on changing some of these things at Blinker right now based on some of the things that we've brought up the last couple months. So you can change these things even if you're not a manager. And yeah, one thing that I think is really important to talk about is how you can earn like allyship, I guess. How you can be a good ally is not to have just good intentions, it's to really close your mouth and listen. And yeah, I'll talk about this a little bit on the next slide, but yeah, it's really important to let people tell you what is bothering them and what they want to do about it instead of always trying to like kind of be a hero. One thing you can do is to start the community you wish existed. So I started that Women in Elixir Slack group, and helped with some of the teammates to start our women's group at at Blinker. Yeah, a lot of times you won't see some kind of niche group to find your people, but you got to just make it. One thing that I talked to people about that made a big difference to them feeling included was, this was with a woman that worked with some of the core contributors to Clojure. How do you say Clojure? But she really felt very welcome on her team, even though she had some like kind of big wigs that she worked with, because they were very good about like owning up to their mistakes. So it kind of like destigmatized making mistakes. And even as a junior, if a senior is saying that they made a mistake, technical or otherwise, it was something that she felt comfortable doing after that. Having good code reviews. I feel like code reviews are like always kind of like a touchy point for people, like especially in the remote days where it's really easy to misinterpret somebody's comments on your PR. And my rule for that is if it's more than like a one and done comment, so like, hey, you have a typo here. Okay, I fixed it. Or, let's rename this thing. Okay, I changed it. Or no, I'm not doing it because of blah. If it's more than that kind of thing, I would much greatly prefer that you just like get on a Slack call or whatever and talk through more thorough PR review comments, because it's way easier to actually understand each other and not feel like you're being attacked. Couple more things is it's really good to give juniors real work that they can chew on, something they can like feel ownership of and like get exposure to management, or like, I don't know, kind of just like having that feeling like I did this. And you would be surprised like that people can probably do a lot more than you think they could right off the bat. Yeah, a couple of other things are you can be a mentor, whether it's just like informal or formal. We're always looking for more mentors for touring school students. And last one is, I know some people hate this term, but please don't mansplain. If someone comes to you with a question, please do not just say like, oh, just read the docs, because if someone like got up, like there's probably a whole process that happened before they came to you with a question. So if somebody came to you with a question, you can assume that they already Googled it. And you could obviously reference like a specific part of the docs or something like that, but please do not ever just say, read the docs. So yeah, all of this stuff, like, I think it's really a situation where like one bad apple can make somebody feel very unwelcome, especially if, you know, there's no consequences for that person's behavior. In kind of the same way, like thinking about that woman whose senior engineer was like very forthcoming about his mistakes, can really make people feel welcome. Come on. So yeah, just a couple, like I had asked a few women to fill out a survey, women in tech and women in Elixir, to fill out a survey, and some of the stories that I got about what made people feel welcome were a lot about active listening. So like checking back in after somebody got interrupted, or following up on something that a woman mentioned earlier, that kind of thing. Another thing was, yeah, a man asking his female colleague if she felt like the person they were interviewing was focusing mainly on him and not even really like making eye contact with her. And she really appreciated that, because like it made her feel like she wasn't like crazy and making it up. So that kind of thing can be really good as an ally. And then yeah, kind of on the flip side of all of this, some stories that made people want to leave their job, or even like tech in general, like you said, were not seeing any women or people of color in leadership or even on the team at all. Especially in leadership, like even people with good intentions definitely have blind spots. So I think that having marginalized folks, like no matter what their demographics are, tend to, I think, be able to better empathize with other marginalized groups and imagine what they are going through. Another thing that made people want to leave tech was like the bro culture of like teasing or referring to everybody as the boys or the guys, that kind of thing. Somebody did report that they had unequal pay for the same experience and that kind of thing. So it's definitely still something that's still happening. And one other big thing was being forced to do like administrative tasks for the team. Kind of goes into that same thing of like making sure that juniors or new people are getting assigned like real work, not just kind of administrative tasks. And then a little bit of stuff that's kind of specific to Elixir. I was curious about like how people got into Elixir. And again, it was mostly people that either like had contacts at a company that using Elixir or learning on the job, and a little bit about like being interested in the tech itself. They picked the language, I guess, in general based on good onboarding docs, having a good community, and of course, like technical strengths like types or functional programming and that kind of thing. Yeah, a couple random little things before that didn't really fit into any of the other categories were we had a really big discussion at Blinker over the last month or two around the phrase assume good intent, which, you know, I've heard for probably over a decade. as like a core value of a lot of teams. And we intentionally got rid of that goal for our team because it's become very apparent over the last few years that having a goal of assuming good intent puts the onus on the marginalized person to not feel the feelings that they're having. Like it almost puts the blame on the person that is offended instead of the person that is being offensive. So we had a really hard time like thinking of how, like what to replace this with, but I think it really came down to like when somebody brings up an uncomfortable topic, especially if it's regarding some kind of like discrimination, not feeling welcome, that kind of thing, like close your mouth, listen to that person as hard as you possibly can, and do something about it. Follow up with them, make sure that the solution that you guys come up with is something that works for everybody. Because yeah, it's really hard to come forward with feedback, and if you flub it once or twice, they're just never going to come to you for feedback about these difficult things again. So it's really important. Another interesting thing that I heard about one of these kind of like phrases that we need to get away from is like, instead of labeling someone as like a racist or a sexist or whatever, we really need to focus on like how our actions are racist or sexist, because we all have biases, and labeling someone as one of these things is just kind of like the end of the conversation versus identifying like whether it was intended or not, how, you know, things that we benefit from or things that we say are inherently racist or sexist or whatever. I thought that was an interesting discussion point around all this stuff. And then, yeah, I think I kind of talked about this earlier on, but we need bigger changes than like just hiring diverse people, like getting people into the company or whatever. Like we need to have an ongoing discussion and empowerment for marginalized folks to actually make changes to the system that they're in, instead of just operating in what already exists and was, you know, created by mostly straight white men in tech. So yeah, I think that keeping communication open and preferably having diverse folks in management can go a long way. Oh yeah, I want to know your stories and if you guys have any questions.